Are you him? Can you be him? Do you want to be him? Who is him? A lot of questions about him, and let's see if we can get those answered here. Starting with the IMDb plot. A young athlete descends into a world of terror when he's invited to train with a legendary champion whose charisma curdles into something darker. All right, so this one is also a new one, been out for a little while now. Maybe some slight twists and turns, but I guess if you don't know much about the movie, haven't watched the movie, I guess, it is. But I think, once you kind of watch or start watching the movie, you at least kind of know, the direction of where this is going. But with that, I will try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. I mean, there might be a slight thing I want to mention about the end, but for the most part, we'll keep this spoiler-free. I will note, for Promote Horror, we did a whole thing. They sent us jerseys for it. I did a whole thing with Dexter, the intern, for it, so I'll make note of that. Doesn't mean I won't give an honest review, and I think you'll see at the end of this, it's fairly obvious. It's an honest review for it. I didn't really want to put on the jersey again for this. If you saw that clip that I did for it. But anyway, moving on from that. Interesting, something that we don't get to see a lot of here, and that's a sports-themed horror movie, or horror movie with a big sports theme in it. Obviously, we may have seen horror movies with athletes in it. One or two of the characters are an athlete, this and that, and so forth. But not, a movie really tied horror and sports so closely together. So, I was excited about that. Maybe this will open a door for something in a different avenue. Again, I'm always looking and rooting for horror that is trying something new and different and whatever. I mean, even though it may tie in elements of horror that we eventually know and familiar with, at least we're in a different area and something to give you, different thoughts or something different about it that kind of stands out. So I was definitely excited in that realm that they went down this avenue. Again, does that mean it worked? Does it mean it's a good movie? And we'll find out here shortly. But basically, we have here is we see, kind of an old clip of it as they're watching and rooting for him. Early on is this legend that we eventually see. He's apparently won many a Super Bowl, but got injured, and that kind of was going to cut his career. But, he was still able to overcome and still be a champion. It ended up supposedly being one of the best quarterbacks and football players of all time. I don't know. I would have wished they, I guess if you're a football fan and so forth, maybe they went, I see how it tied into the story, made sense, but I wish maybe they did something a little different. It kind of made me think too much of Tom Brady. And I guess if you're a fan of Tom Brady, that's fine. But if you're not a fan of Tom Brady, it was a little annoying because every time they mentioned his status or how many Super Bowls he won or whatever, that was my immediate thought. And as you might tell, I'm not a fan of Tom Brady. So, that was a little bit annoying and didn't do me any favors in how I'm going to rate the movie. Yeah, you're going to get penalized for that. Throw a flag on that. But anyway, besides that, the other end of that is we get introduced to his other character, who is he's coming up, he's having his struggles. His name is Cam, and he's trying to be that next quarterback, and there's some expectations to him of being the next good quarterback, next great quarterback, but he's still not really there yet. He still needs some work and so forth. And, as the legend is kind of going out the door, but he's trying to hang on. He still, wants to play one more time. He's still trying to hang on to that position. So I guess, in terms of if you're an athlete, and especially if you're a football player or whatever, I guess very relatable in that stance of when your career is kind of coming to the end, and that next young guy and that next young person is coming up, and they're priming, ready to take your spot. And I guess if you're again, I assume if you're watching this, you're definitely a horror fan, but maybe how much of a sports fan you are. I don't know. If you're not, I don't know that you're watching this movie. But it's a familiar theme within football. You see, especially with quarterbacks. Whether you have an older quarterback tutoring a younger quarterback and so forth, we get that conversation all the time. So you kind of have that here, and Cam decides to go and do this unique training thing with the legend here, and something that's not really necessarily with the team, but it's something on the side that the legend has done in training others and so forth, and Cam decides that he gets the opportunity to do it, and he decides to do it. So he goes to this certain location, a little bit out of the way of everything, and has to ditch his phone and whatever. So it's just him and the legend and some of the staff that's around in this house to start training. And everything seems fine at the beginning. It seems pretty normal. Starts learning some things, whatever, and then things start to get a little weird. They start taking some blood from him. Then you start having this weird interaction with some other players that come, and a couple of the training exercises they do. Then he starts kind of seeing things. Are they there? Are they not there? And he kind of spiraling a little bit out of control mentally as he's continuing to go through this. Some of the training exercises and so forth. I don't want to say too much and go too far with it. And like I said, I maybe some of the stuff is a little bit hidden in whatever you won't see coming, but I think it's fairly obvious that and I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but I will say spoiler alert just in case. But it's fairly obvious that in one way or the other, football or not, Cam and the legend are going to go head to head in one way or the other. One, because again, one is trying to hold his position, the other is trying to take it, and so forth. And I guess it's a battle to see who's going to win. And as opposed to doing it on the football team, on the football field with the team, it ends up being here in this circumstance, in this training place. And you might also see kind of where this is going as it goes. Besides that, with some of the other stuff that I'm failing to mention, but it slowly becomes a little bit more bizarre and crazy, and definitely goes from football to horror by the time we reach the end of it, and so forth. So what to overall say about it? I think it's a good attempt, a good try. Like I said, I credit them for going into a different area and combining two things. Obviously, football, lots of people like football, love football, and so forth. So if you kind of love football and you love horror, I can see definitely wanting to watch this movie and see where it goes. Again, a credit to them trying to do something a little bit different here. I thought, there was nothing wrong with the performances of Marlon Wayans, or I think it was Tyriq Weathers who played Cam. I didn't find anything wrong with their performances and so forth. I thought they fit what they did. Splitting the role between being football players and then later the horror stuff. I think definitely I think kind of I guess Tyriq did okay as a football player, but I think in some of the ending stuff when it went more to horror. I actually liked him in that a little bit more. Maybe because I liked that when I actually got to the horror thing. Of course, I enjoy the football part, but it was whatever. It's a horror movie, and that's what I want to see. With that, I kind of, without giving away exactly what happens at the end, much like Home, where the movie Home that was with what's his name, Pete Davidson. Where much of the movie I watched, I was kind of like, whatever, okay, you're sprinkling in some stuff that's interesting with a scene here or there, but overall just not feeling it. But then you hit the last 5 minutes and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Where was this the rest of the movie? Um, I almost got that kind of vibe here. Again, I'm not going to say what happens at the very end of this movie, but when that actually happened and that kind of played out, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The horror has finally arrived. We're scoring a touchdown at the end. It's like, we're throwing the Hail Mary at the end of the movie, and, it's working. We're touchdown, we're celebrating. I don't know if we're the visitors or the home team, but we just made a comeback, and, we're really excited now. But unfortunately, the clock has kind of run out. It's like, you might be excited about the moment, but, the buzzer ends and you just say, we just came up short. That's kind of the feeling I have about it. I liked what they did at the end. Really, they really went into the horror at the end. Yeah, like, it's sprinkled throughout here and there. Like I said, he sees stuff, and, you get clued into certain things that you think are going to happen and may or may not end up happening. I think, you kind of guess what's going on here. But, but then when it gets to the strange stuff at the end, when it gets to the horror at the end, then I'm locked in. But by then, it's almost too late. Like, it's almost too late. So yeah, I wanted to enjoy it a little bit more. I wished it, I don't think it did, that great overall in theaters and so forth. So I wished maybe this would have done a little bit better to open the door to maybe some other horror that's sports themed, and maybe it still will, but maybe it won't. I don't know. But yeah, I like that. So if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm referencing. Definitely at the end of the movie, definitely when we really got to the horror stuff, really like that. Everything else in between, it was it was okay. Like, it was just okay. With him, I don't know, movies sometimes with horror movies where characters just kind of like seeing stuff and you don't know whether they're really seeing it or they're dreaming it, and that kind of, I don't know. I don't know if it's just the amount of horror movies I've seen, that stuff, sometimes begins to wear on me a bit, and it's just like, why can't we just see stuff that's just happening? I don't know. Or, it's okay to do it once or twice, but when you kind of rely on that a little bit much to reflect your horror in the movie, I don't know. There was a decent scene. I think they were in a sauna or something like that, and something happens there. I'm not going to give it away, but that was okay. And obviously, one of the training exercises, that was okay. But I don't know, like, I just wanted more overall from the movie or something else. I don't know. But definitely liked the last few minutes of it and where it ended up. Again, everything in between, I don't know. So I'm not going to say overall this was a victory. Overall, this was like I said, a touchdown. It's one of those things where maybe, your team fell behind, really early on and made that good effort at the end, but, just kind of came up short, and you kind of get that kind of feeling. So I guess that's kind of the way I'm going with this one. So with that, I think I'm just going to give it 2 pools of blood. Maybe deserved a little bit less if it wasn't for saving a little bit at the end with that ending that I actually enjoyed. I don't know if any of you enjoyed that. So yeah, so it's going to get 2 pools of blood out of 5. So with that, horrorscorereviews.blogspot.com is where you can find all of my reviews written in video. Certainly tons of video reviews for a while now, so you can like and subscribe and do everything else that everybody wants to do here on YouTube. Twitter, Facebook, information down below as well. Reach out to me there, talk about this movie, other movies you want to see. Sports and horror combined again in what sport is it that you want to see? Feel free to tell me there or down in the comments section, and we'll see if it eventually happens or not. So with that, I will catch you on the next review, horror fans.